This is 90s Classics. I am Tim.
And I'm Andrew.
And today's podcast is talking about the 1997 movie Mimic. Mira Sorvino, Jeremy Northam. Now, we talked last time about which version we were going to watch. I think at the time we were talking about whether or not to watch the original and the director's cut. I know I only watched the original.
Same with me, just the original.
Yes, and just for the record, for those people who heard the last episode, I did ask my dad whether he watched it. He had absolutely no memory of it whatsoever, but said it sounded like the sort of movie he would hate. So that sounds about right.
I'm clearly correct here. I stand by my point. Your father definitely watched it and detested it.
Absolutely. Now, this was your choice, Andrew, so maybe do you want to start us off with your reflections on Mimic?
Certainly will. I mean, I guess my overall reflection is, after we looked at the IMDb score and it came back as, 6.0, why was it so poorly regarded? I thought it was a pretty good example of the genre and held up pretty well. I think it was an inconsistent movie in that it seemed to me to be portents of the directorial genius that Guillermo Del Toro was to become set against some clunkier parts. But overall, I thought it held up pretty well versus its era and genre. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I broadly agree. I could understand why people didn't like it to some extent. I thought there was some inexplicable plot holes. There was some characters who were a bit weird, and certainly by modern standards, there was some slightly odd ethical moments, like the whole storyline about Mira Sorvino and Jeremy Northam unable to have kids. But don't worry, they solved that by adopting the autistic kid at the end after his granddad died. Happy ending for all round. Thought that was very strange. But at the time, it felt perfectly natural. Oh, this is such a happy ending. I love it. Child protection won't in any way get involved in this situation.
It was like, bringing up the child, the point that you raised in the first movie about the child dying. I think you said at the beginning. I can't remember a child dying at the beginning, but I remember being particularly affected by the two children that discovered the cockroaches things and sold them to Mira Sorvino. And we saw them in enough scenes that we got attached to them.
Yep.
They had personalities, they had character, they'd been through an arc, and then they died.
Yes.
And that stood out still 25 years later. You don't do that in cinema.
Yep.
And they did it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was what I was referring to. Similarly, I remembered it being much earlier and much more almost, I didn't remember them having built them up so well. But yeah, they were a proper part of the movie. You assumed they were going to go through and in some way be the plucky kids who somehow play their role in saving the day, and then quite a brutal death about half an hour in. I thought that stood apart. I mean, I thought you could tell it was an A-list director learning his craft. I thought it looked noticeably more artistic and just generally it looked a lot nicer than a lot of those same movies around that time, and in a sense a lot better than it than it needed to be, in a sense. It was interesting that he was apparently so upset by the final cut. I did a very little bit of research, and it suggested that it actually wasn't really structural issues, it was more artistic issues. And so I'm not sure the final version or the director's cut would make a huge difference to the final product from my perspective. But I think he didn't like the fact that a lot of the artistic control had been taken away, as opposed to sort of plot and substance of the story itself, which I guess for me was, if there were weaknesses in the movie, that was where they lay in my mind, I thought. Positives, first of all, from your perspective?
Mira Sorvino was a really strong central figure, I thought. The kind of role that might have aged because it was very late 90s, but didn't. So I went, this is an Oscar-winning winner applying her trade nobly to different fare. Thought that was excellent.
I completely agree there. Before you move on, I thought she was great. It's always that risk of someone playing a scientist character and having to believe that this person could conceivably be that smart, and I thought she easily pulled it off. I thought she seemed absolutely great. Loved her, super charismatic, super smart.
by and large, I thought the subground single setting that we had for most of the movie held up pretty well. So the scene with multi-levels underground was quite effective in that you got some tension from, the bugs are above you or below you, and that added some sort of relativity and an isolated environment in the middle of a big city. So I thought that scene setting was quite well done.
Yep. Yeah, it had a funny structure about it, I thought. And it sort of, for the first 30 or 40 minutes, it almost felt like a bit of a police procedural, doing all this research, trying to find what's going on. And even when they were at the railway station, it just felt like another part of the investigation. And then all of a sudden, I can't remember exactly what happened, the ground collapsed beneath them, and suddenly it's really one extended action scene for just about the last 45 minutes of the movie. I thought it worked really well. If anything, I thought it felt a bit rushed in a sense. I could have happily had more of the procedural part at the start, and then and then I thought the underground part was a glorious conclusion, but actually made up just about 50% of the movie.
I thought that the aforementioned quite bloodthirsty, I thought that worked quite well. Not the glorifying in blood, but they killed the right number of people, that it was genuinely surprising. The Josh Brolin character, obviously before he got famous, the assistant detective.
Oh, yep.
The grandfather, we got super attached to the grandfather, loved that actor, loved that character, such a warm heart, and, taken away from us. So I thought that in this, versus the sort of sanitized PG, everyone and the dog survives except the person that's got bad guy stamped on their head, I thought that was quite effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought it did a really well, especially because I could really not remember the movie at all. So I was 99% sure Mira Sorvino survived, but couldn't have said for sure about anyone else. And I didn't... It was bloodthirsty enough that I was thinking, geez, I'm pretty sure this kid's going to make it, but I'm not completely confident. And, adds that extra layer of tension that you're genuinely not sure that your main characters are going to get through to the end of the movie.
I'd also call out a particular scene, the scene where Mira Sorvino gets grabbed in the subway. She's in the subway just standing around looking at the door where all the action is, and I'll come to this later on in the bad section as well, but in this particular case, one of the bugs standing there sort of turning towards her and then kind of picking up speed and flying and carrying her away, I thought was particularly shocking and striking. Yeah,
agreed. I thought it looked really good as well for obviously a movie well before CGI had, actually maybe not before CGI, but I don't think it used an awful lot of CGI, I would be thinking. I thought that scene, I remember, looked really good, and I thought generally speaking, the creatures looked really good. They obviously used the trick of setting the entire thing in almost pitch blackness, but it worked, and you saw enough to not feel ripped off. But what you saw, I thought, looked really good.
They're probably my key points. Anything else you wanted to raise in terms of positives?
No, I don't think so. Look, I think that sort of hits the main things that I thought were really good about it. Looked really nice, great performances by Mira in particular, and a sort of artistic flair that you didn't necessarily expect from a movie like that. And look, I thought really the whole finale was really exciting and really done it. Built up, it was a bit of a slow burn at the start and then built up really well, and the finale was satisfying. So I think it ticked all the boxes, and I fully understand why I really liked it at the time. But having said that, I also understand possibly why it got 6.0 on the IMDb, and so from that perspective, let's move on to your negatives.
Well, I thought Jeremy Northam was pretty forgettable. I could not get around Jeremy Northam. I've seen him in a few period pieces, and his particular brand of woodenness, slight distance kind of works ish in those movies. It didn't work for me here. I'm not sure if I was influenced by the fact that I think I read something where he and Mira couldn't stand the sight of each other or something rather during the movie. But I I struggled to warm to him as a character.
Oh, that's interesting, because that's one of the points I was going to raise, and it was to the point where I was genuinely not sure if I was supposed to like him or not, because I thought he was really quite a jerk.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that story about him and Mira Sorvino not getting on, and I was really just going, there's a lot of mansplaining going on, a lot of, you can't be, no, I'll go out there and do that because you're the woman type thing. And I was genuinely wondering, I think he's supposed to be a slightly flawed good guy, but I was kind of looking at him as, well, I think this guy could be the bad guy, which is why I guess I was a bit...
And is that just the 90s, or was that character? We'll have to watch more movies to find out.
Exactly. And so at the end, when of course his sort of glorious reveal, you assume he's dead, and then he sort of rises from the ashes, I got to say, I was like, poor Mira Sorvino still has to put up with Jeremy Northam from now. I mean, I warmed to him sufficiently that I was scared for him at the very end when he was doing his final battle. But pretty much up until that point, I was perfectly happy for him to meet a gruesome end.
Super vanilla, I thought. So that was a bit forgettable. Other than that, I just thought there's a couple of fit issues. The first fit issue is the whole children dying, disease, backstory behind why the bugs were there with the actual presence of the bugs. It was like this incredibly powerful backstory with almost no relevance to most of the movie. Like, other than a justification for us to like the main character despite the fact she'd done this. But I just found it sort of two separate movies, like the very catchy opening credits with the backstory on what had happened and what New York City had been through, then kind of irrelevant to about 90 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because in fact that in a sense was a positive that I was thinking about, this actually genuinely interesting ethical question behind it about how, they indisputably caused the events that Mimic was set around, but yet in doing so saved, I can't remember, hundreds, thousands of children from dying from whatever the disease it was. And I liked that line where I think she goes to her old professor and says, do you think we did the right thing? And he sort of answers in a roundabout way. And she says, well, that doesn't sound like an answer. And he says, well, it's not a simple question. That was a really good line, but I think you're right. It doesn't really go anywhere in the sense that fundamentally it explains why there's a bunch of bugs in the subway and why they then have to kill them.
The other big fit question to me was just the title. The concept of this being about bugs mimicking humans. Like, that was the biggest stretch of the whole thing.
Yeah.
That the bugs had grown to this size, and very sketchy explanation about why they looked like they did and had mimicked humans, and almost irrelevant again, because... okay, with their wings drawn around them, it looked like a person wearing a coat from 100 metres away in a darkened room.
Yep.
Any closer than that, it looked like a big bug. So a couple of scenes where people with limited vision might be confused over a very long distance on a dark night with smoke in the background.
Yep.
Other than that, irrelevant. So that was just a bit tacky, I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, it also goes to the most ridiculous scene in the movie where in her lab and someone who you don't know at the time breaks in and basically rescues the cockroach that she's got in her lab, and it turns out to be one of these mimic creatures who's somehow broken into her lab and stolen her baby. And just none of that fits with the rest of the movie. There's absolutely none of it. It's just utterly ridiculous to suggest these things are smart or attentive enough or could possibly have snuck through the building, broken in the way it did, and just inconsistent with the rest of the movie. So, great scene in itself. Totally understand why they had it in there. But, it had the same fundamental flaw that actually really didn't make sense once you even spend a minute thinking about it.
Yes, I think that probably stands up. So, I think they were probably my key thoughts. Like, sort of, good on the optics, quite aesthetically well done. But, some of the sort of plot and storyline issues. A couple of the other actors were sketchy.
Yep.
The policeman didn't really set me on fire. The Josh Brolin character didn't really set me on fire. So inconsistent, I think.
Yeah, look, I think that's about right. I think it, well and truly telegraphed where Del Toro was on his way to, whilst also telegraphing the fact, well, either that it was his first movie or that it was a movie he didn't have complete control over. But either way, I think it was a good movie. Fully appreciate why I loved it at the time. Also kind of appreciate why it hasn't gripped. People don't still talk about Mimic except for people like you and me talking about 90s podcasts. So,
would you watch it again? And if yes, how many years would you leave it?
Look, I'd watch it again. I'd be interested to see the director's cut. I guess if I was going to watch it again, I'd probably check that out just to see if there was any differences. But look, I can't see myself going back to it for, 3 or 4 or 5 years until it's a bit more in the back of my mind.
I would think so as well. The shocks and the uncertainty was probably necessary to make me enjoy it to the degree I did. If I watched it again, next month, it probably wouldn't set me on fire. So I'm going to put it out at 2030.
So now I think it's my turn to suggest the next movie.
Bring it on.
So I am going to suggest The Relic, directed by Peter Hyams. Starring Penelope Ann Miller, and I thought I was already thinking of it, and then the recent news that Tom Sizemore passed away, I thought made it appropriate to do it now. From what I remember, the plot is Penelope Ann Miller works at a museum, people start to die, and it turns out there's a big monster that is killing everyone. Tom Sizemore as the cop comes in, investigates, and ends up in, obviously it's an action horror, fundamentally involving monster versus Tom Sizemore and Penelope Ann Miller. This is one of these movies that I put in the category that I just thought it was an absolute total masterpiece at the time. I just thought it was, I couldn't believe that it wasn't winning Oscars, breaking box office records, and I rewatched it multiple times at the time, have not watched it for 20 odd years, I would have thought, and I am concerned it will not live up to my memory of it. In fact, it's just about impossible that it could live up to my memory of it. But I just remember it being absolutely awesome. And so I'm very interested to see how it's held up.
Very excited by this choice. I, too, was an extraordinarily big fan. I feel like I have a relatively good memory of it, actually. I watched it several times. I would concur about your basic setting. Tom Sizemore, I think, was just coming off the period of his career where he kind of, I remember thinking he was like a poor man's George Clooney. So kind of, not as good looking, but the similarly sort of, slightly prematurely grey, gruff kind of character.
Yeah, I can see it if I squint enough. I can see it.
Probably need to squint enough. That was probably before his hard lifestyle took hold too much. I remember there's a part of it which might not hold up so well, I think, is the origin story of how the monster gets there. Mm-hmm. There's something about it being, they went to South America and there were some leaves that were eaten and it grew inside a leaf or something or other.
Yep.
I remember that being a bit odd. I remember an epic scene with the SWATs. The Rock,
yes,
you bring in the SWATs.
Yep.
Because you want cannon fodder, basically. Yep. And I particularly remember one of them dying an awesome death.
I remember exactly the one you're talking about.
Looking forward to seeing that again.
Indeed.
But I remember it being very good. Again, I think it was slightly better reviewed, and I think it was regarded as a little better than you might think. I also don't know if you remember the actress that played the head curator of the museum is a particularly famous, very small lady.
Yeah, I knew her because she was playing a judge in Picket Fences.
Okay.
So I actually knew her reasonably. No idea what her name is off the top of my head, but yes, I knew her from that, but I'm not sure what else she was in.
She was in a number of things around that time. It'll come to me when I watch it. And I remember thinking Penelope Ann Miller, poor woman's Nicole Kidman. So to me, it was Nicole and George Clooney but they couldn't afford them, so they went with cheaper actors and actresses.
Amazing.
Maybe that's harsh.
Because I'm not sure which order these came in, but I remember Penelope Ann Miller had the 1-2 punch around about the same time of The Relic and Carlito's Way, two of my favourite movies, well, of all time, I guess. And so I remember at the time I was thinking, oh my God, she's an absolute hero. And she was, but obviously career didn't quite take off as I expected it to. And I just remember Tom Sizemore, and I obviously realised that, his personal life was fairly troubled. I just remember thinking he was just one of the most charming, likeable characters in any movie I'd seen around that time. Just absolutely loved him. So again, I'm hoping that wasn't a 90s thing, and that he's actually not so likeable and maybe more of a jerk than I remembered. But look, we will see.
I don't remember how it ends. Excitingly, we've been talking about it for 3 minutes and my brain's been circling. I have no memory of how it finishes. I think the main leads survive, but beyond that, I couldn't tell you. I think they get it, but I don't remember how. So I'm pumped to find out.
I do, I won't spoil it then, because I do remember a crucial part of the big finale, but yes, I won't spoil it, because I remember it just being spectacular. Whether it was or not, we'll wait and see.
So pumped.
So all right, well, very excited. We'll head off and watch The Relic, and we'll be back shortly with our review.
Awesome.